Leeds Archive of Vernacular Culture is a very large, unique collection, and it's based at the University of Leeds. It's currently housed in special collections in the Brotherton Library, and it's in two parts. So the first part is the Survey of English Dialects, and that's a big dialect survey that was run from Leeds in mainly the 1950s and early 60s, and they went right round the country. So there's lots of resources from that. And the second part is stuff that came from the later Institute of Dialect and Folklife Studies, also based here at the university, and it ran from 1960s to mid-1980s. So it's a very, very large collection. It's got lots of different things in it. So it's got lots of dialect research. It's got things like dialect word maps, so what do you say in particular parts of the country. It's got lots of fantastic audio recordings. It's got wonderful photographs, lots of in-depth studies from all over the country and all sorts of things. So witches' stones in Yorkshire to weather customs and folklore elsewhere. So it's a very rich and varied collection, and it's unique, and we're really privileged to have it. So the Survey of English Dialects started quite a long time ago. Harold Orton and his colleague Eugen Diet started talking about this as far back as 1930s. But nothing was really done until after the end of the Second World War. So they really started in 1946. They were worried that post-war, because people were becoming more socially and geographically mobile, that they would move around the country more, and that therefore the dialects might change forever and might be lost entirely. So they wanted to go out and collect dialect, traditional dialect, and they thought that would be best found in mainly rural areas. So they went to little villages, and when they were there, they administered this enormous dialect survey, which had been very carefully designed and had 1,300 plus questions. I've been very privileged to interview some of the original field workers, so the field workers who were sent out from the University of Leeds, mainly in the 1950s, into early 60s, but it was mainly the 1950s they went out. And they were sent off with a map, told which village they were going to. They would spend a week in the village, and very different from the way you would do that kind of thing nowadays. They would turn up usually at the local post office, and they had nowhere booked to stay. They didn't know who they would be talking to. They would turn up at the post office, and of course the postmaster, postmistress knew pretty much everybody. The local policeman was also quite a good source of information. They would ask, are there any people in the village who've lived here for a long time? They were mainly interested in people over the age of 65 because they had older forms of the dialect, and so they were interviewing people in the 1950s who'd been born maybe in the 1890s or before, some of them. Some of the people they interviewed were well into their 90s, and so there's fantastic stories and memories that these people have.
Did they make a lot of cider on the farms then?
Oh yes, fill every barrel they could lay their ends on. As things went on, and well, then these factories got a bit bigger, and they offered such an enormous price for the apples. They went up to £14 a ton. Well, a farmer wasn't going to make cider and give it to his men then, for if he could make £14 a ton of his hundreds of pounds for orchard apples, you see.
I think for me, dialect matters because it's at the heart of who we are. It's so central to people's identity. Dialects are associated with places, and so the way you speak reflects where you're from, brings back memories. It's really at the heart of personal identity. You could think of a dialect as being made up of 3 different ingredients. So you've got pronunciation. That's what we would think of as accent. That's whether you say bath or bath, for example. Lexis, vocabulary, those are your words, so whether you say woodlouse or roly-poly. And then you've got grammar, so grammatical forms, the word order that you use, how you put words together. So combined, those three different ingredients make up dialect. Accent is just pronunciation on its own.
I think dialect matters because it's not just about the language, it's about who we are, it's about where we come from, it's our sense of identity, of history, of place, and we're much more connected nowadays than we ever were before. You know, at the time the original dialect surveys were done, people didn't move around the country or the world as much. But I think even though we are, you know, a global society connected 24/7 nowadays, it's perhaps even more important to have that sense of rootedness, belonging, who we are. And I think dialect plays a major part in that. The survey of English dialects went round the country. They went to 313 different places. And I think it's really important that the stuff that we collected in those places is shared back with the local communities. Because not only is it dialect research, it's people's history, it's their heritage. And so we're working with 5 museums spread out across the country. So we've got 2 in Yorkshire, the Dales Countryside Museum in Hawes, Rydal Folk Museum up at Hutton Hall. We've got the Avencroft Museum of Historic Buildings in Bromsgrove, so that's sort of in the middle. Right down in the south coast, we've got the Weald Downland Living Museum, and then across in Stowmarket, we've got the Museum of East Anglian Life. And these museums have all of the objects that we've got the language for. So, you know, we might have dialect words for particular objects around the house, or sort of, you know, rural life, farming, that kind of thing, and they've got the physical objects. So thematically our collections are very closely linked, and they're also contemporaneous, because most of these museums were being set up in the 1960s and they were collecting old objects at the same time as the university was collecting words and pronunciations mainly from older speakers. And there's something magical happens, I think, when you put the objects and the language together. It's almost like you can hear the voices from the past.
Well, first I got a clean bowl. Then I put my flour in, and I put my yeast rises in warm water with a bit of sugar to make it rise better. And I rubbed some lard into my flour, a bit of salt, and then I mixed all up with some warm water. And I kneaded it real well. Because if you don't knead it real well, you don't get good bread.
If you're inspired by stories of dialect interviews in the 1950s and 60s, you can absolutely be a part of bringing that up to date. You can be an interviewer. We're providing training for people to become dialect field workers. And you can also be an interviewee. You can donate your voice. So you can get involved with the Dialect and Heritage Project. The first stop is our website. There you can take part in dialect surveys. You can find out about dialect where you're from. We're also running a dialect roadshow across the country. So if you would like to take part in events or help out at events, we'll be recruiting volunteers. And there'll be events happening all over the country at our partner museums.